how do you control power without completely destroying it? That's pretty much the central question of all politics. And over the centuries, societies have come up with some really fascinating and frankly complex blueprints to try and answer it. So let's dive into 4 very different strategies that governments and rulers have used to manage, divide, and balance power. We're going to start with the most aggressive tactic, one for seizing control. Then we'll shift gears and look at the architectural designs for limiting it. Things like separating powers inside a government, spreading them out across different territories, and finally, sharing that power with society itself. It all leads to this ongoing challenge of just keeping everything in balance. All right, first up, the oldest trick in the book, divide and rule. Now, this isn't about creating a stable, happy government. No, this is all about gaining and maintaining power, and it's often done through conflict and a whole lot of manipulation. And this idea goes way, way back. While the famous Latin phrase divide et impera came much later, the core concept is often traced back to figures just like Philip of Macedon. You might know him as the father of Alexander the Great. He knew instinctively that a united enemy is strong, but a fractured one, well, that's an enemy that's easily conquered. So, how does it actually work? It's pretty simple and pretty brutal. You take a large, potentially threatening group, and you just break it into smaller, more manageable pieces. You stop them from linking up, maybe you create some rivalries, and you definitely fan the flames of any discord among them. And the result? They're all too busy fighting each other to ever think about challenging you. And what Machiavelli points out here is so smart. He shows how it has this dual use. It's not just some political axiom, it's a core military strategy. Make your enemy suspicious of his own allies, force him to split up his armies, and you make him weaker. It's really about engineering weakness in your opponents. And you see this strategy play out all throughout history. Think about it. Caesar conquered the powerful Gauls by dealing with the tribes one by one before they could unite against him. The Romans used it to break up the Greek leagues. And much more recently, colonial powers like Britain and India and Belgium and Rwanda used this exact tactic to cement their control, often with absolutely devastating long-term consequences. But what if your goal isn't conquest? What if it's stability and freedom? Well, that brings us to our next blueprint, which is designed to prevent the very concentration of power that divide and rule loves to exploit. This is the whole idea of separating governmental powers. The formal term for this is trias politica, a model made famous by the French philosopher Montesquieu. The basic idea is to split the functions of the state into 3 distinct branches. You've got the legislature, which makes the laws, the executive, which enforces them, and the judiciary, which interprets them. The key is that no single branch holds all the cards. Now here's where it gets really clever. It's not just about separating the branches, it's about making them interdependent. This whole system of checks and balances gives each branch tools to limit the power of the others, so the president can veto a law, right? But then Congress can turn around and override that veto. The judiciary can declare a law unconstitutional, but it's the president who appoints the judges. It's like a built-in constitutional tug-of-war, and it's designed to create friction and force compromise. The U.S. Constitution is probably the most famous application of this entire theory. The framers were deeply suspicious of concentrated authority, so they built this structure of checks and balances right into the government's DNA. They truly believed it was the most effective firewall they could possibly build to protect liberty. Okay, so we've split power horizontally, right, between branches. But what about splitting it vertically? Let's move to our third blueprint, which distributes power between a central government and regional ones. And this is what we call federalism. And as you can see, it's a really popular model, used by many of the world's largest nations. In a federal system, sovereignty is constitutionally divided between a national government and smaller political units, like states or provinces. And both levels of government have their own authority. They can act directly on the people. This model is especially useful for huge, diverse countries like Australia and Canada. It allows for national unity on the big stuff, like defense and currency, while also giving regions the flexibility to manage local affairs, things like education and culture, in a way that actually suits their specific populations. Now here's a crucial point. The word federalism can actually mean opposite things depending on where you're starting from. In the United States, the original Federalists were arguing for a stronger central government to replace a really weak Confederation. But in Europe, with its long history of powerful, centralized nations, federalism usually means the exact opposite. It means pushing power away from the center. Okay, our final blueprint takes a completely different angle. It moves beyond the structure of the state itself to formally share power with major players in society and the economy. This is a model called tripartism. At its core, tripartitism is a model of economic governance that's built on partnership, not conflict. So instead of the government just imposing policy from on high, it actually engages in formal cooperation and negotiation with what are called the key social partners: organized business on one side and organized labor on the other. The whole goal is to create economic policy by consensus. So you basically have these three pillars at the negotiating table. You've got business groups representing the employers, you have labor unions representing the workers, and then you have the state, which acts as both a representative of the public interest and a kind of mediator. And together they hash out things like wages, benefits, and workplace safety. This model is a real cornerstone of the social market economies you find in places like Scandinavia and the Benelux countries. It's also the fundamental operating principle of the International Labor Organization. That's a UN agency that brings together governments, employers, and workers from all over the world to set international labor standards. So we've looked at four very different models, one for conquest and three for cooperative governance. But the story doesn't end there, because managing power is a never-ending project. It's a constant balancing act. And this right here is probably the most important takeaway. These are not either-or choices. A country can be a federal republic with a clear separation of powers and still use tripartite models for setting its economic policy. You can think of them as different blueprints in a toolbox for the incredibly complex architecture of governance. Which really brings us to our final question. These models, they were all designed for a world of nation-states. But today, power is also held by giant multinational corporations, massive online platforms, and transnational movements that don't care about borders. So the real question for all of us is, are these blueprints designed for a world that's past still enough to manage the new powers of the 21st century? That's the challenge we're all facing right now.